We're all good to go. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Doug Brunke, founder and CEO of Global Chamber. And this is a very special Globinar. We have three extraordinary speakers. And this is all about having a year of growth, progress, and success in 2020. It's a new year. Some call it a new decade. Technically, it may or may not be, but it doesn't matter. It's what we make of it. And our three speakers are all very successful, really talented, and they've got a lot of really important things to talk about. Our first speaker is Marco Roberts. He's the International Speaker of the Year every year. He's an author. He's a business investor. He is traveling around the world. If you get to know Marco a little bit, you get to know the world, because he's everywhere. He's helping businesses around the world be successful, and we're really pleased, Marco, that you can be here. Thanks, and let's let you kick it off.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Doug, and welcome everybody. This is an exciting time, man. This is really an exciting time. 2020, man. I remember when I was just about this big, my dad used to tell me about 2020. He said, it's gonna be an amazing year. So, some people have called this the year of perfect vision. So I think the best way to start the year is actually to make sure that everybody is aligned with their perfect vision, right? So you have to start thinking, what are you going to do this year? This is the beginning of the year. This is an exciting time. And this is the time when, as a business owner, you have to start looking at, what am I going to do? What do I plan on accomplishing this year? So what I decided to do is I decided to share with you some of the methodologies that I actually share with my clients. Like Doug said, I travel around the world. I have clients in probably close to 40 countries at this time. And this is stuff that I have developed. It's part of a bigger business model that I developed about almost 20 years ago now, called BOSS, or Business Optimizing Strategic Systems. In other words, it's a series of systems that I created to strategically optimize any business. And you'll see how important that is as you grow your business. So what I found, and the reason why I created this methodology in the first place, is because I find that a lot of business owners, instead of making fact-based decisions, very often rely on their emotions. And if I had enough time, and I do when I speak in front of big groups, I always ask people, I say, raise your hand if you've ever made a bad decision in your life. Raise your hand if you've ever lost any money. And then I say, okay, how much money was it? If it was more than 10,000, you can drop your hand. And then we wither it down until just a few people who have lost usually, 500,000 or $1 million or even more money than that in their business endeavors. And I say, now tell me what happened? Why did you lose $1 million? And then the person stands up and tells a story. And then I go back to the person, I put my hand on their shoulder, and I say, for you people in the room, I'm going to translate what this person just said. Susan just said, Marco, at one time in my life, I made an emotional decision, and it led to me losing $1 million. Is it true, Susan? And then I turn to Susan, and she says, yes, it's true. And I say, it doesn't matter how much money you have lost in your life. When we lose money, it's because we make emotional decisions. So I say, let's create a model that removes us from emotional decisions. Business should be a fact-driven model. We should make decisions based on data and facts. So the first thing I want to tell you is this. I created this thing called the sequence. So you have to understand, where do you actually fall in the sequence? That's going to help you make better decisions, right? So the first step of that sequence, I call it the mastery sequence. The first step is you, right? Maybe you've asked yourself this question before. Why is it that some business owners, no matter what business they undertake, no matter what project they decide to get involved in, they are always successful? And on the flip side, why is it that some business owners, no matter how hard they try, they can't seem to succeed? Well, let's just make a presupposition that maybe it is because there is such a thing as the profile of an ideal business owner. Maybe before you can build a business, you need to become the kind of person who can build a business. Does that make sense? Yes, right? So who's that person? Who's the person who can actually we can actually build a business? Well, I spent the last 30 years of my life looking into that. So I will sum it up into what I call the 4 keys to success, right? Number one, the people who actually master businesses, first and foremost, have a mastery over their own emotions. What does that mean? That means that, see, the average people out there, if it rains one day, then they're not going to go to work. If there's not enough gas in the car, they complain. If their breakfast is cold, man, the day is ruined, right? So most average, what I call normal, average, and ordinary people, usually by 10, 11 a.m., they've already given up on any chance of making that day a successful day. And this is day after day after day after day, because they have not developed that filter to filter out. You see, it could be raining and you could be happy. You could have your breakfast could be cold and you could be happy. You decide. Well, master entrepreneurs actually have this ability to decide. Number two, they have more energy, more stamina, right? So you need to look into your own method to have more energy, more stamina. Number three, they know themselves. They understand their own strengths and they understand their own weaknesses. And this is not whimsical. This is not, foo-foo. This is scientific. These people spend time and energy and money to actually discover what their strengths and weaknesses are constantly. And then they play their trump cards. They play in their strengths, and then they delegate their weaknesses. And number four, people who have a lot of success in life tend to also understand the world, right? You're building a business. A business is an exchange between human beings. If you don't know how human beings think from a psychological perspective, if you don't understand movements or trends in the economy, if you don't understand how people react in group settings, if you don't understand basic social sciences, it's going to be really hard for you to build a successful business. So those are the 4 keys, right? So that's step one. Some of you have already overcome that. Some of you, you've built a lot of businesses and you're already successful. You already adopted the profile of the right person. So I say, hey, keep on working on it. That's awesome. Then what's the next level of that business mastery? Well, the next level is now we need to make sure we build the foundation of the company. We need to build the foundation of the business. I call that to master the actual business, right? So number one, value creation. You need to bring more value to the marketplace than than the competition. There's 2 sides to that very quickly. Number one, you need to bring intrinsic value in your product and your service, something that differentiates you. But number two, and this is what a lot of people miss out, you need to bring value into the perception of your business, right? So value is a value proposition on one hand, but it's also value perception on the other hand. Very, very, very important. People will buy most of the time the perception they have of your product and services way more than the actual innate value of the product or service. Okay. Number three, some of you have gone way past that. You already have a good business. You're well represented. You present yourself. You have a strong brand. You have strong products. Now we start to look at the next level. And the next level is when you start generating more revenue, right? So now that you have a good product, you need to put together a marketing plan. You need to put together some sales activities so that you can actually build your business to the next level. Then the next step after that, for some of you who already have thriving businesses, usually that's when you're making in the millions of dollars. You could be making 5, 6, 10, 20, 30 million dollars. And then a lot of people plateau at that stage. And this is what I tell them. I said, now we need to go into what I call deal making, right? So what is deal making? Well, you've spent the last 5, 6, 10, 20 years selling widgets and knickknacks, right? You've been selling things, or you've been selling your time. And now we need to graduate you to where you start selling businesses, units of business. Now, you don't have to do it, but if you want to constantly graduate yourself, at some point, you want to sell that practice. At some point, you want to sell your store and then move on to growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'll tell you the key word here. The key word is capital event. At some point in your business, you need to have what I call a capital event, which is a massive transaction, right? And then you've graduated to that level. The next level after that is when you become an expert in investments, right? Now because now you're transacting in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, if not tens of millions of dollars every single time. So you need to become a master of investments. What does that mean? You need to start understanding taxation. You need to start understanding that different jurisdictions can actually play against one another. You know, just in the United States alone, everybody has heard that, you know, Nevada, for example, offers better taxation for certain types of companies, or Delaware, for example, things like that. So you need to become a master of that, but not early in your business. But once you've checked the boxes of the previous steps, then the next step after that is once you're really sitting on top of the world at that point in terms of a business. So what I say is you need to go back and give back to the world, right? You need to start educating. You need to start mentoring other business owners. But again, so many business owners, there are step one, there are step two, a step three, and then they think that they have to mentor people. No. You're still mentoring yourself, right? But then eventually you get to this, you actually check the boxes, you become more and more and more successful, and then it is your responsibility to turn around and mentor other people. And then the last step is basically just where you become, your business becomes a foundation. Your life becomes a foundation. Your life really becomes about just giving back to the world at that point, you know? That's when you've made the kind of money that not only will make you successful, but will make you maybe the next couple of generations successful. Now, guys, please hear me out. I'm not saying that everybody has to follow my plan, but what I'm saying is this. Too often I see business owners who make emotional decisions, and then they get stuck at one of those levels for no other reason than they make an emotional decision. So my job is to come in and kind of rattle you and say, hey, you know what? There are other levels. You don't have to do them, but if you choose to do them, then it's possible. Guys, this is Coach Marco Robert. Thank you so much for having me. And I think we'll answer questions later on, right?
Yes, thank you. I muted because there was some coughing in the room. I apologize.
No problem at all.
Really, we love that you've explained about giving back towards the end, and then you're giving so much. So we really appreciate that. And yes, those of you watching around the world, send in your questions to the Q&A box, or send them to info@globalchamber.org, and we'll monitor them on our side and turn them back to our speakers. The next speaker is Lucie Newcomb, and she's done a little clever thing with the name of her company. It's Newcomb, spelled slightly differently, around like communication a global group, the Newcomb Global Group. Lucie is extraordinary in what she does. She's in the Bay Area. She works with all sorts of technology entrepreneurs. She works with women entrepreneurs and men as well, and she's got her hand right on the heartbeat of what's happening around the world, around technology, around business practices. And Lucie, we're honored and pleased to have you speak today. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Doug. Thanks for that kind introduction. And as you mentioned, I am head of the Newcomb Global Group. I started it actually while I was working in South Africa. People say, how did you get there? Well, I went to London and took a sharp right. I was headhunted, which is a bad joke when you work in Africa, but I was headhunted to go run and reestablish a large marketing and sales department there after apartheid. And that began really the international leg of my career. I had some wonderful earlier experiences, but that was really the most immersive. And so from that, became an emerging market specialist and established Newcomb Global, actually in Cape Town originally, about 25 years ago. And in the beginning, we were an international business development, marketing and sales company, and we're privileged to help many leaders, especially as apartheid fell. I had the privilege of working with the Consul General of Cape Town, and we had the Cape American Business Council for all the returning American companies, because of course, during apartheid, they weren't allowed to conduct business. So I've had a really wonderful career in many ways, helped to establish the Czechoslovakia, and it was Czechoslovakia then, that's how long I've been doing this, marketing association where marketers used to meet underground, like a political party. So I'm so grateful to have had a career that brings me in contact with so many wonderful people like yourself, and have a chance to help business owners thrive as well. So really, I couldn't have asked for more. in terms of our topic today, we have gone on to pivot what is called the global 4EL method, when we help companies go global, or even companies who want to come into the United States. Our primary business is global expansion, but that can include Silicon Valley expansion if you're not from here. And so our model is very simple: explore, establish, embed, which is often where the rubber meets the road, or how committed are you going to be here, and evaluate, and then lead. And so about 5 years ago, I pivoted our company to a horizontal model because I realized that we were doing a lot of other things besides just helping companies establish themselves, as if that weren't enough. We were actually doing things like cross-cultural management, change management, some leading in recruiting, and a number of other things. So I went back and got a leadership master's and a couple of other credentials and added to our team in that way. And so that is where our tagline, Global Business Success from the Inside Out, comes from. Because much like what Marcos said, it has as much to do with the business of business as who's leading the business. So one of the things to stay in touch with, one of the reasons I like global business, and especially global business and technology, is that you really do, thank you for your compliment, Doug, you really do have to stay on top of things. It's not like you're going to read global business in a textbook, which I do teach from, but if you're not staying in touch with the news, then obviously there's going to be quite a gap, particularly in the world we live in, particularly around international trade at the moment. So about 2 years ago, I started to see a real trend towards the popularism, nationalism scenario, and worked on some talks and some additional things, such as what we're going to talk about now, about staying global, because there seemed to be sort of a baby and bathwater mentality around some of these issues. So I put together a small thought leadership piece on how to stay global, because most of us, I'm sure everyone on our panel today, have been around long enough to know that these things are cyclical, that even though we might have a strong nationalist trend today, which I would say is different from what many of us globalists call glocal. You know, we always want to have local relevance, but there are, in some cases, an anti-trade, anti-globalist policy now. And if you're in the business of creating global markets and building on them, which most successful businesses will have to do sooner or later, then it's important to take a look at what's happening. And so staying global for me was a place where we could contribute to business owners, quandary about what do we do now was really the scenario. So I'm going to talk about a couple of key things that we would recommend to help you stay global. And again, keeping in mind this cyclical idea, it isn't necessarily in or out, which is where a lot of people felt they had to be. So point number one, I would say, is to try to review instead of react. Everybody, clients at the time are like, oh, we have to pull out of this and we have to pull out of that. And, those global business, I'm sure everyone on this call knows, is an expensive endeavor. It's a long-term play, especially as you expand further past the low-hanging fruit. And so try to review where things are. Prioritize your current markets over your future markets. It's a good time to go deep. And, maybe rather than expand to 5 markets like you were hoping to do and plan to do, maybe choose 3. Try to prioritize where the highest criteria is, get a little bit, more granular in your data and more granular in your prospects. What does the horizon look like for this period? Can you even deduce how things might go? We have some natural benchmarks in our political system that kind of give us some indication, but even then we don't know what will happen. So try to take a look at, not pulling out all the way, but maybe take a look at how much you want to expand now. And of course, what is the cost of not being in a market? That's also a key to this discussion. Second, try to see how much technology can be leveraged. Face-to-face is always better, we all know that. But in terms of scaling dollars and making investors and so forth comfortable with business expenses globally, you may need to make some trade-offs about that for the near future, with the idea of moving back towards some of those models of more personalized, high-tech, high-touch, as we say here in the Valley, sooner rather than later. And then have a plan, kind of a profile for what walking away might look like. If you can come up with a data-driven model that takes not just quantitative, but also qualitative pieces into account, what does your criteria look like for walking away? And then apply that to the markets that you're looking at going into, for sure, but even the ones you're in now. It could be really important. I remember when PeopleSoft didn't show up to the JP Morgan healthcare conference one year, and their stock took a dip. Sometimes where you are not is just as compelling as where you are. So in deference to my other colleagues on the panel, I think I'll leave it at that. And I look forward to our conversation about how to stay global and win even in challenging times. Thank you, Doug.
That's awesome. And coincidentally, we were just talking about that healthcare conference here in the room. So thank you for reminding us. I think you've been part of that for years, right?
No, I haven't been, but clients of mine have been, and actually it's coming up. It's like next week, I think.
Exactly. Yeah, it's on the Global Chamber event calendar. So if you're in healthcare, that's something you want to be interested in. Lucie, thank you so much. We are cleanup third number hitter, if you will, is Shane Jacobs. And what's cool about Shane is he's spent a lot of time in France and he's worked with clients all around the world. And he's got a lot of practical experience on the implementation of international work. So as you're thinking about, like what Lucie said, is creating a vision that gets you into these markets that are growing, 90% of businesses outside the United States. So it's one thing to imagine it. It's another thing to create the leadership to be able to do it. And then there's another element, and that is, how do you implement? And Shane, thank you so much for what you and your team at Global Upside do. And we look forward to hearing from you right now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Doug. And yes, thank you to Marco and Lucie. This is a perfect segue into the things that I wanted to talk about as you're growing and implementing your vision, and then looking at what markets you want to penetrate. It's important to have the right systems in place so you can be successful in these different countries in which you're entering. And so as you think about 2020 and the challenges and complexities of growing internationally, you need to consider how that looks from an organizational standpoint so that you set yourselves up for success. This could be simply expanding into a foreign market because your product or services is really taking off. Or we're seeing a lot of American companies specifically finding talent internationally, where previously you needed to be at the office every day. Nowadays, as it's demonstrated here, we could be anywhere in the world. And so how do you access that talent, preserve the IP that might be created from that, and do it with 100% compliance in those countries? So I'm going to talk about just a few options which are available to US companies as you're expanding. These options also relate to companies that might be headquartered in other countries as well as they're expanding. And so the two routes that we kind of look at when companies are going into a market are the traditional path, which you may consider of how do we set up an entity or a subsidiary? How do we install our company into this market? We know that this country is going to be right for our business to grow. So how do we do it so that we can not only have a presence in that country, but then also start hiring local employees there? Now, a great way to do this is there's a couple different models or ways in which this can work. And the most popular one is a subsidiary, which is shields all the liability from that foreign entity from your US entity. It establishes yourself in that country. You now have permanent establishment. But there are some other requirements that come with that. They may require a resident director or registered office. A subsidiary also allows you to open a bank account. These are some of the things that you think, yes, we do need to have a local bank account to operate, not only pay the government their taxes, but to ease and use of their money there in that country. It also allows you to start hiring those nationals in that country right away. What also a subsidiary does is it allows you to sponsor foreign nationals. So if you have expats or others that are coming from different countries or third countries, it's important that you're set up properly so you can employ these people in those countries. So that's really a framework that's been traditionally very successful and what most companies do when they start looking abroad. But there's other models in which you can use, such as a non-resident entity. These types of entities allow yourself to have a much lighter footprint. It does not shield your foreign business from your home business or headquarters. So that's something to consider. But it does allow you to start hiring local nationals. It doesn't allow you to hire foreign nationals. So again, it's one of those decisions strategically, if you have in your business, if you're looking to hire third country nationals or not. It doesn't allow you to open a bank account. So again, it's a much lighter footprint, allows you to enter a country, pay the proper taxes and be completely compliant, but it does carry some additional risks as it relates to liability and so forth. So those are just some traditional options that most companies look at when they're going into a foreign country. But there's been a really change in the marketplace lately that's been very interesting. A lot of US companies are taking advantage of using what we call a professional employer organization, or what's also considered an employer of record model. I'll tell a story which illustrates this very nicely. I was working with a prospect where they were looking to hire some electrical engineers in the Ukraine. They were finding it difficult to find talent in the United States that met their price point or their budget. But they had found there were a lot of Ukrainians that were specifically being trained and developed in their niche in electrical engineering. So how do we employ these people in the Ukraine? And going back to some of my previous speakers, what's the strategic direction of that company? Are they looking to grow in the Ukraine? Not necessarily, but they wanted to access that talent. So how do we do that so that we're compliant, not only in the US, but in the Ukraine? And so there's different models in which they can do that. They certainly could set up a subsidiary, but that really wasn't their business model. They really just wanted to access the talent. So a professional employer organization or employer of record model allows you to hire foreign employees in different countries where you don't have an entity. You're hiring them under the PEO, and so that they take care of all the hiring, the payroll, the taxes, all the compliance and benefits that are required in that country. You can then hire them and be able to manage them on a daily basis. It also allows the IP or whatever is being developed in that foreign country to be closer to your vest. That's one of the things when companies start hiring independent contractors, where does the IP lie? And to make sure that that contractually works both in the foreign country and your home country. It's a great option as well when you're looking to enter a market and you're not quite sure if you really want to be there long term. And as Lucie mentioned earlier, there's lots of priorities that you have. But if we want to test a market, but we don't want to outlay the capital to set up our business in that country, this is a great model in which you can have people on the ground, reviewing the market, doing business, being 100% compliant, allows yourself to go through the process of understanding, do we want to enter this market permanently? If you do, great. You can then start with the other options I talked about with setting up an entity. But if it doesn't seem to be a good fit, you can easily pull out of that country by ending the relationship with the PEO. And you're not there worrying about unwinding an entity or what do we do now that we've left that market, because you're doing that through a PEO. So it's a great model to use as you're testing markets, as you're looking to grow and expand. It allows you to do it with a lot less risk than you would say in a traditional model. Lastly, I just want to touch on a little bit of how independent contractors and how that works in the international landscape. And that's traditionally a lot of times what companies will do is they'll hire someone independently in another country. There should be some careful risks that should be associated with that, as when independent contractors in foreign countries aren't necessarily looked at in the same way as they are here in the United States. If a contractor in another country and you are their only client, that country may see them as more of an employee and then attach the employee rights that are associated with that. So again, as you're moving forward, it's really important to understand the risks and liabilities of doing that in a foreign country. Moving forward, then once you've established yourself in that country, it's important to stay abreast of all the different types of laws that change. I'll just raise one last point or story. Back in the springtime, the European Union came out with a new ruling that no matter what size company or what your position in that company, you must account for your time in some fashion. So the CFO, he needs to account how long he worked that week. Now that seems very foreign to us here in the United States, and we're on a salary, we don't need to account for our time. But in the European Union now, it's a requirement. So how do you, as a US company, fulfill that requirement in a foreign country? It's important to stay abreast of what those different compliances are, how the rules change and so forth, so that you're 100% compliant in that jurisdiction. There's also different types of payroll cycles, whether it be 13th and 14th month like they do in Brazil. Many times it's important to understand the severance laws when there's a termination or separation from an employee. And then certainly understanding what kind of tax, VAT, and other compliance reporting is required in those countries. So this are kind of all that, once you've made the decision, you've established your vision, you've now made the decision to go in a foreign country. These are the types of things that, if done properly, can really set yourselves up for success. And unfortunately, if not done properly, can open yourselves up to a lot of liability. So we're excited about how the world's looking right now. Countries are excited to invest or to have more investment in their country. And so US companies are looking to expand. You know, countries out there want your business, and there's just different ways in which you can do that so that you can be successful now, both in the short term and the long term. So I'll turn the time back to you, Doug. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Shane. And we're right on time. This is so amazing. So you guys are professional and amazing and extraordinary in everything that you do, including keeping on time. So we do have time for questions. Send them into the chat area or the Q&A area, or send them to info@globalchamber.org. The first question relates to, here we are at the beginning of the year, and what we've heard from each of you is kind of more on the visionary side, the elements of, you know, the dream of international and the dream of growing your business, all the way down to some very practical tips that Shane shared. So here we are at the beginning of the year. How do we make the transformation? What are some of the things that are necessary? Building a plan is fine, but you've got to have the right information. It's got to be more than just inspiration, I presume. So from a standpoint of a CEO starting the year, and maybe they're 1 year into their business, or they could be 5 or 10 years. What should they be doing right now in terms of making the shift? The shift, Marco, that you were chatting about around the boss model.
So to me, Doug, I think it's not an all-encompassing answer. I think you have to understand what kind of business you're running. I think you have to understand where you are in the cycle of business before you can make these decisions. You know, I hate to say this, but I think we've moved away a lot from information. I mean, we're so inundated by information. I don't think people need more information per se. What they need is they need to organize that information in a better way. You know, I'm a big fan of the word system. Why? Because I remember in my early 20s when I started to think about going in business, I was asking myself the question, you know, why is it that a business becomes successful and then the other one across the street, which seemingly also has everything to become successful, just fails miserably? And I was asking myself the question over and over again. And within about a year, I realized, well, it's systems. It is systems, because you see, if you look, for example, at franchises, why do franchises fail at like a very, very minimal rate, where independent businesses fail at a much greater rate? It's because franchises are systemized. So this is what I always tell my clients. We need to focus on systematizing the business. What does that mean, by the way, right? Well, that means putting together some procedures. That means just as simple as having some checklists, as simple as having some spreadsheets, as simple as sitting down and figuring out the right process in order to actually achieve a certain result over and over and over again, right? And that's why I say it's not just about getting more information. It's about organizing the information you have. And I think Lucie, she said it well. She said in her presentation, she said, you know, sometimes instead of looking away, you need to start looking at what you've already done and maybe just maximize what you're doing. That's kind of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about system. It's just go back to what you're already doing, but then just do it a little bit better.
Got it. Lucie, I presume you have some of the same thinking.
Thank you, Doug. I think I'll zoom the lens out from Marco's excellent micro comments and go to the macro and say, I think now more than ever in global business, it's time to question our assumptions. And especially at the beginning of the year. You know, there was a time when marketing plans had maybe a couple of paragraphs about the geopolitical environment in which a market might be considered. And now it's probably 5 to 20 pages, depending on the market. Things are rapidly changing. I'm sure this is not news to anyone. And all of these changes affect global markets. So I think, you know, sometimes our research lags, and of course we have priority projects. And so data can kind of sit a little while, and especially in technology, and especially in areas like Silicon Valley, things move fast. I mean, we need to really check in about our assumptions, I'd say, culturally as well as data-wise.
Very good. Good points. Very good points. Shane, how do you feel?
Yeah, the thought that came to my head, and it goes really well with the other comments, is that many times we'll make decisions in the short term, which are pressing, which are important, that are required, maybe at the expense of a long-term strategy or what could happen in that second phase. We often talk about that in our business as they're expanding into foreign countries. What you need now can drastically impact how it might be in the future. So taking that extra step to understand how that long-term looks in 2, 3, 5 years will help you make a better decision in the short term, especially as you're setting things up, you're implementing your strategies, going to new markets. We can't discount the fact that there's those two things that you should consider.
The next question relates to the first point, Marco, that you made around emotion and mastering emotion. I mean, people are emotional, right? That's almost by definition. And we all are on a different spectrum in terms of mastering that. What are tips or ideas to be able to get to a better level? I mean, you've mastered emotion, you've gotten there, but I bet you probably have in place some ideas to improve it even more for this year. So what are some of the ideas that you have relative to that, no matter where they are on that spectrum?
Yes. I think the first step is simply consciousness, right? You need to bring it into your consciousness. I'm not talking about consciousness like, you know, like that. I'm talking about, you know, just an ability to intellectualize the fact that maybe you haven't mastered your own emotions, right? Just come to terms with the fact that maybe, you know, if there's a lot of screwdrivers in the drywall in your house, maybe you haven't mastered your emotions properly, right? So that's the first step, is to come to terms with that. The second step is just to make kind of a commitment towards making it happen, right? So you first realize it, then you say, you know what, this is insane. And then you commit to making it happen. Now, from the commitment, you can certainly set some benchmarks to help you make sure that you achieve that commitment. You can use some tools to track how you feel. You can develop new habits to make sure that you do that. And then the last step, and this is a step that I'm very, very in love with. It's a step that happens in neuroscience. And I've been working with a doctor of neuroscience in France, trying to develop the model where we actually, as influencers, we can actually go in and kind of influence the habits of a third party at the visceral level.
Wow.
Right. So first is an intellectual realization. Number two, it's a commitment. Number three, it's that visceral commitment to it. Right. You're like, you know, when you feel like your throat is tightening, and you say, you know what, my life has to change. This is insane. You know, I keep on throwing those screwdrivers in the drywall. It makes no sense. And then you're so committed at a visceral level that you have no choice but to change. So I think those are the three ways that I normally advise my clients.
Fantastic. That makes a lot of sense. Lucie, we don't see any screwdrivers in your drywall there.
Well, I'll have to improve, Doug. I mean, clearly. Yeah, I think that, you know, global business is very intense, and I work in emerging markets, which are not only, but often. And those are very intense and demanding. And then, of course, technology as one of our key service areas are intense. And so I'm challenged with keeping what I'll call a master's mindset, which draws on some training I've had around being in an observer mode and witness mode. I've recently recommitted this year to having an intention for the day, because it's so easy for me and perhaps the rest of us to get bogged down in the tasks and kind of, you know, in wanting to achieve client deliverables, which is the top priority, kind of lose sight. Even though I preach big picture, it's easy to lose it during the day sometimes. So I really try to return to that observer mode of, you know, what is the highest thing I can be doing at this moment with my time? What does X number of clients need today that must be done? What is something that maybe do I need to create some space for some new ideas? Because, you know, most of us who are very good at execution and strategy, there's no room for much new stuff. Oh, I won the lottery, no time, you know. So I think creating more time, creating a master mindset, and then creating a sense of appreciation and reflection. David Rock, the neuroscientist, to go back to Marco's comments, you know, talks about reappraisal. And one of the ways he identifies leaders is the capacity to reappraise or, you know, change your mind based on a reflective, data-driven review. So I think trying to move up to that master's mindset in the midst of what can often be a chaotic day is an important piece to this.
Huge. Fantastic. You know, Shane, you don't have screwdrivers either, but you do have Eiffel Towers thrown on your wall. You know?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I love France, lived there for a few years, and always wanting to go back. But it's interesting because the emotional, you know, what happens with yourself emotionally in international business, you can't discount the cross-cultural differences that exist when running a global organization.
Right.
You know, there's one thing to say, hey, it's a national holiday here, but you know that in certain countries, when there's a wedding, forget about it. They're gone for the week. So understanding some of those things are very important. I've noticed that as you work with teams in different countries, just how they respond back and forth with clients, with internal stakeholders can be very different because of the cultural differences. I've seen it where someone may not get back to someone because they don't have the answer. Okay, that's fair. But you know that to an American, that drives you crazy. You want to know that they're still working on it. But in their culture, well, I'm not going to get back to you yet. I don't have the answer yet. So just understanding those can help you master your emotions so that you're not getting too frustrated when it's not a technical thing or a business thing. It's simply a cultural difference that exists there that you have to work through.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And thank you for emphasizing that particular point, because that is one of my things that kind of drives me crazy. And I think you're right on the money there. You know, some of the most successful business leaders, and I'm thinking of Mitt Romney as an example. Mitt Romney's mind was unique and different, and it seemed like he was able to split out away, far, far away from the emotional element and just look at things very cleanly. I think that relates a little bit, Marco, to what you were talking about in terms of just clarity of reality and being able to kind of put it, you know, forget wars and the politics and all the kind of the nonsense that's going around, but focusing in cleanly and clearly about what you have, what you've done, and how you can make it better. So we're talking about that, right? And that's what makes it so hard, because our family's in the way, you know, quote unquote, in the way. Obviously they're not in the way, but they're bothering our sensibility about what's totally real, about perceived value and actual value that's out there. And so it's a big mountain to climb to be able to get to the top and see clearly, isn't it?
Absolutely. You know, I think we take ourselves way too seriously at the end, you know, and it relates to this concept called the concept of an identity. You know, just take a kid, and then maybe you look at this kid and you say, oh my God, what he's doing is insane. It's ungodly. But then take the same kid and raise him in a different country, same parents, but just move into a different environment. He or she will develop a brand new identity that's gonna drive a brand new behavior. And so I think it's so easy to say, well, this is how I am. This is how I am. And what I find is that the successful business owners are willing to challenge that. They're willing to say, you know, just because I see something a certain way, it doesn't mean that it is like that. And I love what Shane said, because he said, you know, culturally, you know, when you travel around the world, people will have a different perspective. They'll have a different point of view when it comes to everything. You know, I used to live in Guatemala. I mean, there are things that people do normally in Guatemala that if you did in America, you'd go to jail for a very, very long time. But in Guatemala, it's normal, right? And it's you're not going to go to jail for that. And it is so easy, I think, for us, for anybody, whether you're from Guatemala, or whether you're from America, or whether you're Canadian like me, you know, to step up and say, you know what, my point of view is so much better than yours. But that's not true. It's not true. It's not true religiously. It's not true politically. It's certainly not true in business. You know, when you open up your mind and you say, you know, maybe my employees do have something important to say. Maybe I can learn from my competition. Maybe I can learn from XYZ. I mean, I think you start building a really, really good business. And I'm just going to finish by saying this, right? There's a great book out there called Antifragile. If you are into that kind of intellectual reading, it's a very interesting book, because the guy, he was the author of, I don't remember his name, but he was the author of Black Swan. It's a book he wrote after the collapse of 2007, 2008, the financial collapse. And in the book, Antifragile, he says, we've become way too rigid. It makes us very fragile because we think we know everything, right? As a society, as an organization. Just because you've done certain things a certain way doesn't mean that we cannot go back and challenge that. Doesn't mean that. So that's why I go back to the word identity. You always, whether as a human being, whether as an organization, whether as a government, as a nation, you have to go back and look at your identity and be willing to adapt the identity to the realities of the world.
Yeah. Lucie, I think of you when I hear that, because I know you've had like dozens of women entrepreneurs from all over the world that you've worked with, and undoubtedly you've seen that firsthand, right? And it's impacted you as a leader, I'm sure.
Thank you. Yes, and particularly in terms of what Shane was talking about with cross-cultural issues, and I think, Doug, I gathered under your previous comments that sometimes we are the ones doing all the follow-up, and being, I remember a deal that I did where it probably was a 10-to-1 ratio, and just being very sensitive to that, and how cross-cultural issues can create emotional tension, and to create what Edwin Hall called high context and low context cultures, where we've learned a lot, early on as global business people, how areas like Asia, the relationship drives the deal. We Americans, it's like, are you worth my time? The deal tends to drive the relationship. And so around the world, with the leaders I work with, and I'm very privileged to work with, I think those cultural nuances can play an enormously important part. I had one role where I was at the office till midnight being a fool, really, because if I would have left at 8, that would have been phenomenal in this culture. And but I had to be sure that I was on time and at 8 o'clock for the meeting in the morning. That was their cultural values. So I think understanding the value systems that work around these different cultures, as well as the practices that Shane talked about and you were talking about earlier. What are the values that underpin some of these things? Like Shane was talking about the wedding. I think I know which country he was in where, if someone has a wedding, they're gone for a week. So how can we build some of this into our planning and then build enough flexibility and agility to adapt? I think those are key capacities of global business leaders, is how well do you adapt?
Yeah. Are there ways I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I say, and then if one can get past that, then to leverage, we have these great CRM systems that help us remember so-and-so has 2 kids and all of these kinds of wonderful automated cues, but then to really be a person around it, be authentic in your compassion and concern, and empathy, I think has come up indirectly a couple of times in our conversation today.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Would you like to say aloud?
Are there any resources that they use when they're looking at going to new countries to understand cross-cultural issues?
Okay, so the question here from the audience is, are there technologies or resources that you use to understand the cross-cultural issues in a better way? Are there go-to resources that we have members that are experts in those things? Is there are things online as well, and so depending on kind of where you are and your sensitivity, that could you either talk to somebody, or there are resources. Are there go-to resources that you guys use?
Well, Global Chamber is certainly one, right?
Of course, yeah. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
That's a key reason why I joined, was to not just connect and network, but to really have deeper understanding about, the colleagues of mine in these countries, and what are their business challenges, what are their clients' business challenges. Those are really key ways to understand a culture. I personally like the book Kiss, Vow, or Handshake, which is an oldie but goodie. But in addition, I think we have to do our own empirical research, if you like. And thank you for being a key part of that.
Thank you. You reminded me of a book that was my resource, which was Riding the Waves of Culture by Fons Trompenaars, that lays out why we're different and how we're different, which goes to, I think, especially what Marco had talked about relative to people are different, or Shane, you talked about that, you know, how you interact with people is so essential, but it differs from culture to culture. So if you're going to South Africa or you're traveling next to France, you know, where do you go? Do you go to the CIA website, which has some information, or the State Department has information about specific countries? Are there kind of things that you know, before you jump in, just kind of double check in terms of cultural issues?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I don't know if you're asking me, but yes and no. I mean, I just came back from Pakistan, right? And the CIA website basically said, "Don't go," right?
Yeah,
That's basically what it said, right? And thinking, you know, my girlfriend thought, you know, when you land at the airport, they're gonna blow you up. That's what she was convinced of. Right? Well, luckily, because I've traveled to, you know, probably over 30 countries at this point. So what I did is I did my empirical research, like Lucie is talking about. I reached out to friends of mine who are from Pakistan, and then through them I was able to connect with, you know, local authorities in Pakistan, and it turned out to be one of the greatest trips I've made in the last 5 years, and it was actually not that bad. It's actually, and please, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but I felt a lot more safe in Islamabad and Lahore than I do when I go to Mexico City, for example. And then you wouldn't even think twice before flying to Mexico City from America. But, you know, you're going to Pakistan and you're thinking. So that's my way of doing it. Usually it's 100% empirical. You fly in, you make some contacts before. I mean, the Global Chamber is an amazing organization for that. And then I fly in, and then I come in with humility. You know, I don't come in with my ways. I come in with humility to learn the ways of the local people. And they appreciate it. And it's really fun, by the way. It's a lot of fun. You know, to discover new foods, new habits, new ways they move their hands to say different words. And it's fascinating. So if you are curious about these things, I think just fly there, and then wherever you want to go, and spend a little bit of time with the locals. And then, by the way, there are professionals also locally who can help you, guide you in all these things as well. So.
Absolutely. And ideally they're chamber members. You know, Lucie, you've got the experience of having an audience where you've spoken that are multicultural, right? From different, all different. How do you handle that situation where you're addressing, you know, a multicultural crowd?
Thank you. Well, I think Marco used the perfect word, and that's humility. It's definitely, I'm there as a student as much as a teacher, even when I'm in a teaching role. So having answers that hopefully are helpful, but not coming off as a know-it-all, is a fine balance. I think, especially as a consultant, when it's hired for expertise, right? So it's a tricky walk sometimes.
Yeah.
Can I add something real quick, Doug? I know that in our business, it's important when we're going into new countries or helping our clients, is that we may have partners in countries. As we're going to a new one, we'll use them to access different in-country partners as well. And they really help us navigate, especially the complexities of compliance and legal stuff, but then also helping our clients then navigate some of the cultural differences. Using in-country partners are very valuable in that respect. So you can't discount that. And then I echo what Marco said, you know, being, you know, it's just as if another, you know, colleague from another country came to the United States and was very interested in how we did business. We're more than happy to share our culture with them and how we do things. Equally so, if we go in with a mindset we're trying to learn and really understand their culture, they're going to open up. And it's amazing what type of relationships you can build when you just have that sense of humility.
And then we have to remember, right, that wherever we're going, this is what I told my girlfriend before I left for Pakistan. I said, hey, where I'm going, there are human beings who actually live there. Yeah. I think I should be all right. I will be all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the idea about partners is so important, Shane. I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's why joint ventures are often the most successful, when a multinational works with a local partner like GM did to enter China and create their own particular car. So at every level, whether it's the product level, the relationship level, and again, I'm not being paid by Global Chamber today, but I really value the connections made that way. So I'm glad you brought that up, Shane. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there technologies changing? Are there technologies that you're using to be more effective as a leader or as a business person and that you recommend to people? Like for this year, are there certain things that people should definitely be tapped into right now that may be relatively new?
To me, probably the most important type of technologies that I use is communication technologies. I mean, when you try to stay in touch with clients in about 40 different countries, we live in a world that is so amazing. I mean, what we do today, I mean, all three panelists and four, even you, Doug, because of what you've done in the past, what we do in maintaining the global chamber and so on and so forth. I mean, without the communication technologies, and it's evolving all the time, and it's so I'm not gonna point to one specific one because I think it's changing all the time. But there's so many free technologies that we can use, including Zoom. Look at this. We're doing a call today, and it's pretty much free to bring all of these people from all over the world together to be able to discuss these matters. So there are so many communication tools. So to me, that's at the core of everything I do.
Do you use, like when you talk to clients in Copenhagen or wherever, you're on a technology like this?
Yeah. So, I mean, between WhatsApp, between Zoom, and when I go to Dubai won't let you use Zoom or WhatsApp or Skype. So I use something called, I think it's called ToeTalk, TOTOK. However, there's some stuff that showed up in the news recently. So before you download ToeTalk, you should look into it. Some people are saying that it's, some spy agencies actually created that, and it's a way for them to peer and listen to your conversation. I don't know if it's true, but it just showed up in the news in the last couple of weeks. So, but in certain countries like that, you have to use whatever is available. Like the reason why I said that is because Dubai, for those of you who don't know, restricts the communication. So they don't want you to use free communication tools. So the locals in Dubai are always trying to come up with new ways to communicate free. So when you go to Dubai, I mean, every time I go, if I want to stay in touch with people in America or my clients around the world, I have to find new communication tools almost every time I go there.
One thing that we're tackling in our space is compliance. That's what we are helping our clients to adhere to, all the different rules, regulations, and laws. So we're actually tackling that ourselves on trying to find better solutions, whether we're developing it or using partners so that they can be compliant in multinational situations. And so that's something that we're working very heavily on. Something you would think, does it exist out there? It really doesn't. So we're trying to tackle that. Having a software help you be compliant and do anything above board is very important so that you can remain, in good favor in those countries you're doing business.
And then I just want to add one thing, right? It is so common for businesses to look for a technology solution, where in most cases, the technology of 1995 is sufficient to run a successful business. In many cases, okay? Like, let me give you an example. If you Google SAP disasters or ERP disasters, you'll find that there's a lot of companies out there who try to put their operations on these global platforms of technology, and then sometimes it almost kills the business. I had a client in Canada, $100 million a year business, could not retrieve their receivables for something like 6 weeks. I mean, imagine this, they're not able to send bills out for 6 weeks. I mean, they almost went out of business. This is a second generation business, $100 and some million per year. Why? Because they entrusted technology experts to do the job of probably what an organizational consultant should have done before, or a management consultant should have done before, or maybe a systems analyst should have done before, right? Which, before you bring the technology, somebody needs to sit down and figure out the architecture of that. Somebody needs to sit down and figure out the pathways, figure out the critical paths, somebody needs to do the thinking.
The system. I think
before we bring the technology, right?
Yeah, I would say, Doug, that for me, the challenge, especially being here in the Valley, and you're here a lot, so you may share it, is so many technologies, so many channels of communication. And, like Marco, I prioritize the communication technologies. But even then, there's direct messages, there's the social media platforms, there's direct messages of all the social media platforms, there's all my email accounts. So really prioritizing those channels and staying on track. And there are inbox managers and things, but I haven't gotten to those yet. I'm fortunate that I try to go deep on the relationships that need to go deep.
Yeah.
In the Bay Area, the technologies are on the billboards, right? It's
Exactly. There's no escape.
That's right. No escaping it here.
So we've come to the end of the hour. So I mean, I'd love to have this conversation for the rest of the day. This is awesome. You guys are fantastic. Thank you so much. We will, hopefully we've done it correctly and we've recorded this and we'll put a blog post together. So those of you who are speakers, if there's some things you've left out or want to share, let's put it in the blog. And then for those of you who have questions that we didn't answer, send them in to info@globalchamber.org and we'll take care of it and we'll get it out to the speakers. If you'd like to contact any of these three speakers, you can go to the Global Chamber directory or, again, info@globalchamber.org for anything that you need. Thank you all for being amazing. Let's have a great year. Let's make it a great year, shall we?
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Happy
you
New
very
Year,
much,
everybody.
Doug, Shane, Marco. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New
guys.
Year.
Thank you.